Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Amazing podcast. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Amazing, and we like to bring you all of the conversations around cloud native and Kubernetes, things that are of interest to anyone who works in this space, whether you're on the ops side or even on the dev side. If you like what you hear today, go over to amazic.com, amazic.com, and you'll see a lot more podcast episodes like this, a lot more articles on these topics, and there are even event coverage. We recently covered KubeCon EU in Paris, so go and check out some of the video coverage there. So we do a lot of stuff in this space, so you want to stay tuned and follow what we talk about on a weekly basis. I'm excited today because I have with me a company that is doing some really cool stuff in the sector of compliance and security, specifically for cloud native and containers. I have with me Neil Levine, who is the VP of product at Anchore. Neil, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good. Doing good. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So before we get into talking about compliance and all things Anchor, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your story up to Anchor.
Yeah, so I, like many people, started off on, in an engineering position, doing network engineering, systems engineering, some software development, and found myself working in open source from very early on. I worked in the service provider market in Europe where there wasn't much money and a lot of scale issues, and open source was the only way to resolve those. So my career sort of, was at the dawn of the internet or commercial internet and at open source at the same time. And after 10 years of sort of working in technical positions, I sort of moved into working with vendors and specifically open source vendors. So I had some time at Canonical, some startups here in the Bay Area where I'm based, and then Red Hat. And then I joined Anchore in 2019 after leaving Red Hat, and was interested in the security part of open source, having used it so widely. I could see all of these looming security issues, which are now, in the headlines. So it was clear that open source and security was like an interesting place to continue my open source exploration.
Oh, really cool. So which is your favorite Linux distro, and do you still actually use Linux on a day-to-day basis, or have you switched over?
No, I do. I still run some servers actually for sort of friends and family. I host websites and emails and WordPress instances. So it's a mixture of Ubuntu and Debian. So no, I still play with it, home media servers and stuff like that. But I admit I don't use it on the desktop anymore. I was overwhelmed by the Mac sort of
Okay.
usage that predominates out here in the Bay Area.
Yeah. A lot of people switch over after a while. Uh, so yeah, I want to dive in straight. So there's a key term that's been talked about a lot, especially in recent years. We've been hearing a lot about these big, huge attacks that affect these large tech companies and their customers, which happen to be some of the big organizations themselves. And so the term is SBOM. So I was wondering if you could start us off with just giving us a definition of SBOM, what that means for people who've not heard of it before, and even give us some examples of, some of these news incidents and why that's become so popular now or important.
Sure. So SBOM stands for Software Bill of Materials. Um, it's really it's a ingredients list for any piece of software. In the same way, if you go to the supermarket and you take down a sort of a can of baked beans, you can see what's inside it. You know how much it's got salt, it's got sugar, coloring, and so on and so forth. And so, in the food industry, it's very important because if you have allergies or some intolerances, you want to know that kind of stuff. So SBOMs are the equivalent for software. So it tells you for any given piece of software what's inside it. And as as a lot of people are now waking up, a large percentage of what's inside any piece of software, whether it's in a car, it's in your fridge, on your desktop, on in your TV, is based on open source. And so SBOMs have become really critical to help people understand particularly their security risk, because open source has been so it's not badly maintained, but it's been maintained without really an eye on security. And so when a vulnerability comes out for a particular piece of software, knowing if you have that piece of software in your application suddenly has become very, very important. So that's what it is. The reason this has sort of really come to the fore is probably because of these increasing security incidents. If we go back, Log4j was maybe the most sort of identifiable instance where everyone was panicking that there was a piece of software, Log4j, this open source logging software, which was absolutely everywhere. And it had a vulnerability which scored 10 out of 10, and it was a remote execution vulnerability. And so we had lots of companies going, do we have it? Where is it? And the answer was lots of places, but they have to start trying to find it. SBOMs, if you have a catalog of them, gives you that answer immediately.
Okay, really cool. And so everyone's read about this, that there's this executive order that's been passed on this. And so obviously it's a big deal. If the government itself is going to pass an order saying, we need this from organizations. Could you tell us a bit about this executive order? Does it apply to all kinds of companies, or are there certain companies that are exempt from this order? And what's the implication? Has the industry even started to take steps to actually have an SBOM in place, or are they still coming to terms with, okay, how do we do this? We're still figuring out all of this. What do you see happening around this?
Yeah, so the executive order was born of a realization of the risk that the federal government was facing for pretty much everything to do with what they call cyber, but sort of software in general. All of their software systems were really at risk. And if you go back, there was the various attacks on HR systems and other things, and there was a recognition that they just didn't have a lot of grip of really all of their software systems, and it was leaving them exposed. And in particular, they wanted to try and put the onus on vendors who are supplying them to sort of produce their security bona fides. And so, it's not always practical for the consuming organization to take all of the security responsibility. So the government, because it has huge buying power, it spends a lot of money, it's able to set the rules and say, well, if you're going to sell to me and potentially make me insecure, I'm going to put some responsibilities on you to show that you're not making me insecure. So that's kind of where the executive order was born out of. And it's manifested itself in many different ways. The area where sort of SBOMs and supply chain security has come to the fore is particularly around if you're selling software specifically to the government, you now need to sort of be able to produce certain documents and pieces of content to help them both understand the risk and manage it once software's up and running. So software may not be vulnerable at the point of sale, but it might become vulnerable later, and they can more easily see that and get greater transparency. So the executive order really applies to any bond selling to particularly the US government. But it tends to be the case that these type of rules and best practices, when they're codified by the US government, the cost of doing it is not insignificant, and so companies have to get into line, but then all of their other customers benefit from it too. So an enterprise that's consuming software from a vendor, they can ask for the same things too. They know it's being produced at the government. Why wouldn't you want that as an enterprise too? So the idea, the government's using its buying power to sort of really try and change, improve its own posture, but also to drive change in the industry more broadly.
Oh, interesting. So, I wanted to ask about for those organizations that, let's say, they don't supply to government, institutions, and they probably have read about these things in the news, but then they think that, our company is not as big as that, or, it's not as complex. We've got things under control. We know everything we have, in our cloud estate, where it is, how it's connected. We're not as at risk. But those kind of companies, those organizations, I was wondering, what are some of the signs, the telltale signs that, you need SBOM? If not, you're putting yourself at risk, and you might take this lightly, but these are signs that you actually need SBOM. Could you tell us some of those signs?
Sure. I mean, I think if any security manager says they have a handle on what software is being consumed and used in their organization, you might want to look around for another one. I mean, just the amount of software, even in a small company, is
Mhm,
extraordinary. Um, Fine, you have people using, off SaaS services and everything else, but even on the desktop, any developer tools or IT tools are complex. This is the thing, you may think you're running a single application, but as we described earlier, it consists of lots and lots of dependencies, typically open source dependencies, amongst other things here. So, it's the unfortunate reality that almost every company is at risk, no matter what size you have. If you're using technology in any way, you really are at risk. So, the as a consumer of technology, having access to your SBOMs is that it just gives you, it's a catalog, it gives you an index so you can immediately know if you're at risk with any situation that develops. Now, certainly smaller organizations may not be on top of the latest security breaches. They may not be sort of monitoring this. This is not their job. They're not in the software world. But if their vendor notifies them of issues or something like that, they can understand immediately, whether they're at risk or not. Vendors don't necessarily keep a track of which versions companies are using, and obviously some vulnerabilities are present in some versions and others. So just having a track of these versions and the ingredients of these applications, I think is it's really valuable for anybody. But to answer your question around how prepared are people, are they actually doing this, what's the state of the art? I mean, it's absolutely the beginning of this. It's hard enough for very large organizations with lots of resources to put this in place, let alone small companies. And the standards for SBOM documents and how these documents are passed between entities is still a work in progress. And the company I work for, Anchore, is involved in a lot of this at the moment. But it's no doubt that a lot of companies are playing catch up on this. Some are more mature than others. And but coming back to your earlier question, the executive order is definitely setting this to be a higher agenda item in larger companies where there's certainly more, they have more liability because of the volume of software that they're selling and consuming.
mhm, mhm. Okay. Well, taking a step back, though, I want to ask about just broadly compliance, even apart from just this specific thing of SBOM.
Yeah.
And especially with in recent years, with Kubernetes coming to the forefront and, big organizations going multi-cloud. We're talking about cloud native. And so there is definitely a shift that's happening in the cloud ecosystem. And I was wanting to ask you, what's all this meant for compliance? What are some of
Mm.
the new challenges that organizations face because of all of these changes in just how cloud infrastructure is today?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, even though compliance is not considered to be an interesting domain. But there are so one of the ways that this government executive order around cybersecurity and software development has manifested itself is in a new compliance standard. So you have NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who their responsibility is to turn this order into, well, here's an actual compliance standard which you have to meet and prove that you're meeting it. So that's now happened. We now have new NIST standards which have put into practice or have documented what compliance means when it comes to secure software development and the use of things like SBOMs and so on and so forth. So it is a very vibrant area. And the challenge is that compliance used to be a sort of a once a year, the auditors come around with the clipboards, you've got to try and make them happy, and then you forget about it for another year. But to the extent that compliance is helping drive, minimum levels of security, you do need to be doing it every day now. I think the standards are reflecting things you should be doing, the best practices you should be implementing. And it's very hard to do that when the software is changing every minute, every hour, with every commit. So the speed of software development in the cloud native space is just, increasing the challenges of trying to keep things compliant. And so this is, one of the areas that, Anchor was founded to try and help how do you maintain compliance and perform compliance in an automated way rather than in this very, very human intensive way that was the case perhaps before cloud native. And with the fact that these requirements are changing, you're getting new requirements coming down the line. It's not like, you have a compliance standards, which is the same now for 10 years and you forget about it. They are evolving a little more quickly. And I think the expectation is, especially as industry is waking up to the vulnerabilities in the open source community, and that it's going to start to sort of put in new compliance requirements around what open source you can use and can't use. As we just saw in a recent compromise attempt on the SSH utility, it's a compliance standard could say, listen, don't use software where the committers are unvetted or there's not good practices around check-ins and other things like that. So you can start to see these conversations in the compliance community right now. But we do have immediate challenges with the existing compliance standards, and implementing in cloud native ways is, it's not easy.
So we've discussed kind of the backdrop of compliance, but I wanted to ask about moving into kind of the solution and what's Anchore's approach to this challenge of compliance. You kind of hinted at it in your previous response, talking about compliance has become continuous, and that Anchor has found automated ways to do continuous compliance. Could you give us some more details and kind of tell us about Anchor and its approach to compliance?
Sure. I'll avoid the hard sell and sort of just explain maybe some of the the technical concepts that we built the product on, so people can understand how they sort of connect with current challenges. So, previously security, as I mentioned, security and compliance was very manual. It was often sort of very infrequent. And often, well, almost exclusively, it was actually done in runtime. It was like we take the running application and we check it for compliance, once it's up and running. And so, Anchor was founded recognizing that actually, there's so much more you can do. And now shift left is a term. There's so much more you can do before runtime, actually, that you should be doing compliance checks and monitoring things before it goes into production. So that was the initial insight, which meant integrating into things like CI/CD systems, code repositories, and the build pipelines themselves. The other sort of fundamental sort of insight or sort of position around Anchor was capture the data using SBOMs, get all of that SBOM data and store it. And then you can answer questions about that data later. So as compliance change, your requirements change, or as the questions that the security teams have to answer evolve and change, you've already got the data. So, we often joke, well, not joke, but we say, look, we're actually a data company that happens to be doing security workflows rather than a security company per se, because our initial goal is just capture all of the data, all of the insight you can about the application and store it, and then let people ask questions, as opposed to having people ask the questions and then trying to work out how you answer them and, try and catch the data on the fly. So Anchor is generate the SBOM as high fidelity in SBOM as possible and generate it with every single commit, because the SBOM is constantly changing and evolving. So track these SBOMs as they change over time. And then you essentially are getting the history of development and the history of deployment to production. And then you can ask questions: what changed between time A and time B? Or where is this particular application? Or who added it in? Or how many different versions of SSL am I running? Or any of these kinds of questions. So that was move left, get this data before production, store the data, and then allow for evolving questions around security issues with the software.
Really interesting. Yeah. So data first and then security seems like the story for Anchor. Could you show us that's turned out in your product, what it looks like, maybe a demo or a walkthrough of what it's like to use Anchor?
Yeah, sure. Let me get this into a separate tab. One thing I've learned from doing demos is make sure you don't have any other tabs in the background which reveal confidential information and so on and so forth. So let me just share a document here. Here we go. All right. So hopefully you can see the Anchor dashboard here. Can you see that? You can hopefully.
Yep, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay. So let me go straight to sort of the meat of the system here. So let's look at some container images.
Mhm.
And we have a lot of container images here. And within, this is representing registries, repositories inside those registries and so on and so forth. So within this repo, we have a tag, which is the latest tag. And we have a single image in this tag here, which has got this image identification. So let's click on that. So we're now looking at a single SBOM in effect that we've analyzed based on a container image. So this container image may be deleted or it may be out in production, but we've got all of the data around it and we've persisted it. And so here, if you click on SBOM, you can see the breakdown of all of the content. You can see how we've categorized it, based on common language environments, NPMs, GEMs, Pythons, Java, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that we are actually very proud of is that for a lot of people, an SBOM is just a list of package dependencies. But for Anchor, it's not. It's literally a catalog of every single file on the whole entire file system. It's not just, do you have log4j installed or SSH installed? It's actually, what are all of the files and every piece of metadata we can find about it. So here, if we click on files, you can see we're looking at people's configuration, personal login configuration details, all of the boot up scripts, everything. Because compliance can also be, don't allow files with insecure permissions or don't allow users to have this in the home directory and so on and so forth. So a very, very deep, high fidelity sort of SBOM. But obviously, if I find this, let's see what this one has. Hopefully you can see bash here. So this one actually looks like it's a fairly primitive container. I can see somebody was playing around with this. Let's go to something a bit more involved, which is a Red Hat image. We've got 4 images here inside this repository. So open up, I'll take a little bit longer, hopefully, because it's a larger file. Again, we'll look at the SBOM. This is where I should be better prepared and have something here. Going through and seeing, well, so because this is an operating system image, so you can hear all of the operating system packages that we've cataloged here. These are all the packages provided in this base image by Red Hat. So we have this SBOM of all of this content. So what we allow you to do in our system is then define policies. And this is where the compliance thing comes in of like, what is your policy? Or, and it can be a formal standard, a NIST standard or a US, government standard. Or it can just be your internal best practices as a company. We don't allow this. We only allow that. This is important. This is important to be present in the image. And we allow you to define very, very complex policy rules, dictating what should be available in the SBOM, what should not be available in the SBOM, or what should be allowed out in production, what should not be allowed out into production. So if we look at something like a very common but sort of somewhat low level policy is CIS, which is a pretty common sort of baseline of security checks specifically for containers. They've got a very sort of formal list of container checks here. And so if we click here, we've got some rules, software checks, Docker file checks, and file checks. This is a little bit dense here, but what this is saying is vulnerabilities, right? If you find for the packages in the SBOM, if any of these packages have vulnerabilities of a certain, severity, or they have a certain score from a vulnerability source, you should stop. And what stop means is stop the build, stop the production deployment, or if you want to automate it, we don't just, shut the instance down if it happens to be it's something that's running live, which, typically you have more of a manual involvement in. Maybe you don't want to stop things. Maybe you just want to warn about things. There's it's a concern, but it needs to be investigated later on. So the policies here allow you to sort of define, this is on vulnerabilities, but it can be in anything, packages are present, they're not present, or configurations even are set up in the right way on the image. Encryption is turned on or off, this kind of stuff here. So you then define the policies that interacts with your software development workflows, stopping things, preventing them being deployed, or just generating warnings, which then allow you to go and, using our reporting system, you can generate reports to find, what is breaking, what is causing issues, and or use notifications to send those alerts back to developers immediately. So something's failed because you've used a piece of software which is against our policy, you need to replace it or take it out, get that opened up as a ticket in GitHub or Jira, get the developer to fix it, and hopefully then submit new software which doesn't fail the policy. So that's a
Mhm.
very, very quick overview, lots of details, but
Yeah, sure.
I've skipped the details,
Yeah. How do you actually define the policies? Is it in YAML, or do you have like an interface there to
Yeah,
like
so
set?
this is it's actually in JSON. It's a JSON, but it's a native language for Anchor. So customers don't have to manage it in this UI. They can manage it as policy as code. So they can store it in Git, manipulate the rules in Git, and then push out to the Anchor deployment or multiple Anchor deployments. But it's a specific language, which is allows you to create rules based on this SBOM data that we have. It understands it's aware that it's interacting with SBOMs as the source of data.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. So I see what you said about automation, and that you can actually stop a code from reaching production if there are things wrong with it, or container images.
Right.
So yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and so just to connect it, because I know the Kubernetes piece is important. So this is a really good example of the compliance story, and how this all fits together is something like FedRAMP. So if you're a customer who wants to sell to the US government web service, you have to be FedRAMP certified.
mhm.
And if you're running those applications in a Kubernetes cluster, you have to know that Kubernetes cluster and the applications running it are all certified. So again, we have all this data, so we can tell you're running these images. They've got particularly say vulnerabilities, critical vulnerabilities which haven't been resolved within 30, which have been outstanding for more than 30 days. Well, that means you're out of compliance with FedRAMP. So a view like this you can see on the screen tells you immediately what's in or out of compliance for the images on your cluster. So it's a very direct way of understanding how the SBOMs can give you that compliance insight.
Really neat. And I also saw something on your website, something like templates or packs where you have different ready-made, I don't
Right.
know, compliance policies in place. Could you tell us a bit about that? How does that work?
Yes, so we offer, building a compliance, these rules are very sophisticated, very, very deep. So we have what we call policy packs, which allow you to sort of plug in the FedRAMP rules out of the box, or plug in US, NIST standard compliance rules out of the box. So, as I said, we have a particular history with the US government and companies selling to them, as well as, the government agencies using that software. So yeah, we've spent a lot of time creating those packs, which you plug it in. There's a few configurations you have to make for your local environment, and then it'll start getting you compliant to those public sector standards straight away.
Wow. Yeah. Also, I saw something about, there's obviously a lot of integration, but one that caught my attention was GitHub Actions.
Mm.
Developers love this feature of your tool, and what does it do?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we integrate with CI/CD systems, and so customers who are building containers out of their GitHub repos and using GitHub Actions to do the CI/CD phase, yes, it can be hooked into Anchor, just as GitLab can, or Jenkins, any of the popular systems here. And exactly this, it's like as you ask for your software to be built, the CI/CD system can be configured to say, okay, it must meet these policy rules or these compliance rules to be allowed to proceed. So if the build fails, then so the build system checks with Anchor, is this build okay? Anchor says no. That failure can then come straight back to the GitHub user and say, nope, the build failed because Anchor said it doesn't meet these requirements, X, Y, and Z. You need to go fix it. So it's that, that immediate feedback to the developer that the software they built is now not going to be compliant. It can't be sent through even to the registry, never mind into production. That's where the interaction with GitHub, GitLab, Jenkins, Harness, these kind of systems comes in.
Right. Yeah, really fast feedback that really, simplifies things, definitely shift left in
Exactly.
practice. I want to get your thoughts on something that's in the news right now as we speak. I kind of wrote a piece on it today, and so it's on my mind.
Mm.
There's this recent data breach with this company, Sisense, right? that they were compromised. Those secret that got leaked in their Git repository and then led to their S3 buckets, and there's
Mm.
terabytes of customer data that got leaked, a lot of it secrets itself. Yeah, just wanting to get your view on it. And, what do you think this incident tells us about uh, what happened and how this potentially could have been avoided, or what
Mm.
lessons, some of the one or two key lessons we could take away from this as observers?
Yeah, I have to confess, I didn't, I saw the headlines around the breach. I didn't actually read into the details. There are so many high profile breaches now. It's really hard to stay on top of it. It used to be once every couple of months there would be, something like Equifax, and now it's
Yeah,
like every week.
yeah,
So it is
same.
pretty hard to stay on top of it. I mean, there are um, I think the delineation tends to be between those where the company has just really not instituted a good security culture and practices, which means that, mistakes, where we all make mistakes, aren't caught, versus those where it's like a determined, state actor trying to access a company, which, is much, much harder to defend against. Um, and so, things like, leaving a secret in a repo, I mean, that's, there's a plenty of our software does it. There's plenty of other software that does, secret detection in your code. And so, it's it's easy for me to say on this side. Yeah, there's a lot of challenges for CISOs and their teams here, but that's not a hard problem to solve. It's just a matter of like, have you instituted all the right processes and culture to have those checks and look at them? Um, so, I think that's really maybe the dividing line now. Is like, have you got good practices and hygiene in place versus no, you have, but you're still going to be vulnerable because you can't deal with everything, and then it's really a matter about how you respond. But yeah, certainly secrets in repos. I mean, it's like leaving your front door keys, plugged into the lock. I mean, you're asking for trouble. It's just a matter of time until somebody comes along and tries it out.
Mhm, mhm. Interesting. Yeah. As we conclude, I want to ask, just get your thoughts on, as you look ahead, the next year or so, what do you see happening in compliance, or what excites you the most in terms
Hmm.
of, what's on the horizon? What do you keep track of? What do you watch? What's on your mind?
Yeah, that's a interesting question. There's a lot there's a lot going on.
Mhm.
I mean, I think the thing, taking us back to the beginning of our conversation, having worked in open source now for um, well, almost 30 years, it's
Wow.
it's interesting to see um how open source is now, or open source security is now a mainstream concern. We're talking during the week when I think there's the open source conference up in Seattle happening, run by the Linux Foundation, and everything is about security at the moment. I think, we've shifted from isn't open source amazing? It's generating all of this community and this amazing innovation. And we're able to do things we couldn't do before, to, oh my God, we've spent 30 years building this huge ecosystem which has absolutely no security in it. It's all a very minimal security. And so I don't want to say it excites me, but I'm glad that it's now the security issues are now being addressed. And I think the big dilemma is it too late? Have we created such a big ecosystem? It's impossible to sort of really make a dent in the security posture. So I think that's one area. I think the other area, there are some technology areas which are interesting, where I feel the community is making good progress in terms of what we're enabling. Um, SBOMs is certainly one of them. There's other technologies like Vex vulnerability exchange, which allows companies to communicate, no, we've looked at these vulnerabilities and they don't matter. You don't have to worry about them, which will save time because it stops every company sort of standing in the island having to make these decisions themselves. It allows for a bit more of a sort of a sharing of information and understanding about what the issues are and whether you need to deal with them. And I mean, it would be remiss of me not to bring up the phrase AI at least once. So I'll do it here, and then maybe we can not mention it again. But AI is very good at finding patterns and inferring things from large patterns of large amounts of data. And it does seem that there are a number of areas in this space where AI may help. It's not going to solve problems, but it can certainly help with prioritization, providing context, or just guiding security teams in their responses. So again, very early days. There's a lot of AI washing and sort of smoke and mirrors, but it does seem as a technology, it's got real potential. So both as a vendor or as a enterprise consumer, it feels that we're at the cusp of some interesting things there.
Right. Open source security and AI, some interesting thoughts there to end. Thanks so much, Neil, for joining us. Thanks for sharing your views. I think it was a really interesting conversation to see all that's happening in this space around compliance, SBOM, and just how policies and automation can be used to keep pace with all of the change. So thanks so much for sharing all those views. It was really wonderful talking to you. Yeah, but before you go though, just one question to kind of get to know you apart from software and your work and all of that, and just to get to know kind of you a bit. Well, I want to ask you, well, as your VP product, and one thing with product is that it's so many roles combined into one. So I want to ask which one actually resonates with you most. So you have to be a bit engineer, a bit marketer, a bit of a community builder, a bit of a collaborator with teammates. So there's so much to it. Which part of being a product guy excites you the most?
Um, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think making an impact at customers would be the sort of very trite platitude, which is, it's whatever makes a difference in, the customer experience, I think is what drives you. And sometimes that can be you've changed pricing and it makes it much easier for them to buy the product and get it through procurement, makes it easier for the sales team to sell it. It can be a brand new feature. It can just be getting the right message, which makes it click, and they understand the value, I think, and they start adopting the technology. I think it's impact based as opposed to um the specifics. But look at heart, we're a technology company producing software, and so I'm always excited by the new features going out, which really make life easier for people. I think the underlying thing is I do empathize with the horrific challenge that most security teams are under, and anything that can make their lives a little bit better seems like good karma. So that's definitely that's what excites me.
Right, really cool. Wow. Yeah, sounds great. Thanks so much for joining us again, Neil. It was a delight talking with you. We hope you
No,
can get again soon.
yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed the questions.
All right. And thank you all of our listeners and viewers for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Stay tuned and go and check out all of the other podcast episodes that we have. I'm sure you'll love it. Again, the URL is amazic.com, amazic.com. All right. Till next time, that's Neil and me signing off. Thank you.